welcome to Dear Katie, the podcast that amplifies courageous voices and real stories of resilience, healing, and hope after trauma. Inspired by the many letters Katie has received over the last 20 years, each week she interviews survivors, healers, and experts to honor their stories and explore the many paths to healing and hope. Before we begin, please know, many episodes of Dear Katie cover sensitive topics related to sexual violence, trauma, and recovery. Listen with care and take the space you need to take care of yourself. Your well-being is what matters most. Now, let's join Katie and today's guest for a conversation that matters.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. As you all know, my name is Katie Koestner. I appeared on the cover of Time magazine a long time ago at age 18 as the very first person to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And since then, I have traveled all over the country and even the world speaking and helping to educate others on this important topic. The Dear Katie podcast is definitely our dedication to survivors and supporters in sharing this her to healing, this whole journey of thrivership together. And each and every one of my guests, I think you'll always find something new that you can hold on to and deploy somewhere in your own journey. And today is no different. Stacey Pinkerton is a marvel. I am delighted to have her on the show, and I'm going to just read a little bit about her and then throw it over to Stacey to tell us more. So Stacey is an advocate and an activist for change in public policy. Although you've done so many more things than just public policy, I feel like you're also someone who's, well, we'll get there, but also someone whose story has helped to shed light on so many important facets of this problem. At the age of 21, she was drugged and held hostage and raped by Bill Cosby. Stacey has worked diligently to attempt to abolish the statute of limitations for rape across the states, all the U.S. states, and address not only the predators that they need to be held accountable no matter, I think, when the incident happened, but also those who enabled the problem. Stacey is a speaker. She's an educator on abuse of power. She's been featured in several award-winning documentaries, such as We Need to Talk About Cosby and the Case Against Cosby and Los Angeles Times podcast, Chasing Cosby, plus featured in articles in the Sunday Times Magazine, among many others. So welcome. We're so delighted to have you on the show, Stacey. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Katie.
I think, and I read so much more about you, perhaps, than our readers will come to our episode with. But I always like to start out where, your early years before this even happened were also full of so many other things that maybe informed how you processed this particular incident. So maybe start out where you were born, how you grew up, and let us get to know your younger self.
I'll try to be brief about this. I grew up in the state of Arkansas, and I had a very, I call it a rough childhood, because I went through a lot of tragedy as a child from the age of the youngest that I can remember was 2 years old. And then when I was at the age of 5, I had brain cancer, and I was given 2 weeks to live. And that was a tough time for me, and specifically for my family, my parents. And I think that surviving brain cancer has led me to react and behave and lead the life that I have and deal with the tragic situations that occurred later on. And there were a lot of situations that are not public yet, and that's regarding, I'm also a survivor of abuse as a child, and and this is also regarding what I would like to talk with you about later, abuse of power, and how I handled the situation, and then again at the age of 17, I was sexually assaulted by my boss, and I didn't have justice with that. Didn't know how to handle this. My father was very strict man who was. He had an interesting life himself, but he was very, very stern and disciplined, and I was terrified of him. So he was not the type of person that I could go to regarding situations that I was going through and in my life. And he was in the, I guess you would call it the equivalent to the NSA of the military, and he was in Berlin during the Cold War crisis. And I think that everything kind of has a domino effect in behaviors and regarding parenting and how you raise your children, and it has an effect that I think people don't often even scratch the surface on, and especially when it comes to the tragic incidents of being drug kidnapped and raped later. I could not tell my father, and
Right.
I
What about your mom? Not her either.
I'm revealing my age now, but I'm in my early 60s, and I think women at that time, regarding my mother, they were a bit more submissive, quiet, and especially she was a young mother, and we live still, but very much so back then it was a patriarchal society, and my mother was not one that I could really deep down have a conversation with about it. I think she just kind of put things behind. But regarding all of the situations, I was terrified of what my father would do to the people. So I kept it to myself, and especially with what happened to me in this state of Arkansas, I decided to leave. And I started modeling when I was 15. And that was not a career that I was pursuing. I was pursuing medicine, but what had happened to me completely changed my whole idea and what I wanted to do. And I just wanted to leave. And so I decided to leave. And the quickest way to do that was the airlines were hiring, and I wanted to be, back then they called it a stewardess. And that was going to be my gateway to getting out and not dealing with the uncomfortable life situation that I had here. So I left Arkansas at the age of 19, and I went to Chicago, and I continued with the modeling. I had agencies that I was working with and were wanting to develop a further career through that, but I didn't agree with the way. And I don't want to say that I'm a rebellious person, but I was 5'10" and 120 pounds, and they still wanted me to lose weight. And I was like, no, I don't agree with this.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
That's crazy.
And we talk about this now, but back then, in the 80s, that wasn't something that was discussed. So the reason I'm getting to the topic of this situation is because I was on a layover and with the airlines, and on my days off, I only worked 13 days a month, and my days off, I would have a job here and there, or sometimes even when I was on a layover somewhere, I would have an opportunity to do a photo shoot for something, and I did that, but it was not something that I felt that I would rely on or wanted to take a chance with, and I wanted to have that stability of having a job with insurance and everything. And I was on a layover in Oklahoma, And the hotel director had met me in the lobby and said, Miss Pinkerton, your limo to the airport is waiting for you, but I would like you to share it with someone, a VIP. And that was against regulations, and I mentioned it. But who was I? I was alone, and I was getting to the airport at 6 a.m. in the morning. And that person who was to share the limo with me was the personal assistant of Bill Cosby, Cam Cooper. And that's how the ball all started, and the enabling, the grooming, and everything. And so I've led you briefly up to the age of 21. So if you have any questions in between that.
No, that was the only other question I have, Stacey, is boy, it sounds like you wanted to get the hell out of Dodge, right? And
Yeah.
as quickly as you could, and probably rightly so. I guess that still means you have an adventurous spirit, and it seems like you were born that way. Do you kind of go back and see your whole life as, you use the word not exactly a rebel, but close. And I like thinking about that. I like thinking about, like, when did we get that gutso kind of style about us? Especially, I'm not that far behind you in age, and I would say I was the same way. So look at us, like, we go out there, we do it big. But and now it made me think about my childhood, and I guess can you remember, like, always being that way? I think I was always that way too.
It's interesting that you ask. I have to share this with you. My grandfather had saw an ad in a newspaper, and it was for beauty pageants. I was not a beauty pageant type of person, but he really wanted me to enter this beauty pageant. And I played the piano. And I played the piano, not originally by choice, because I raced motorcycles.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I,
after not on the talent show, though.
After
there's no category.
After I survived brain cancer, my father, I suppose he thought, I needed a motorcycle. And we did it as a whole family. Everyone had a motorcycle, and that's what we did. And my grandparents had land that they turned into a motocross track. And that's how I spent the good years of my childhood, as what I remember as the good times. And I loved doing that. But something tragic happened to a friend of theirs, and they said, on a motorcycle, and they said, no more. Now you were going to play the piano. So playing the piano, my grandfather decided I needed to be in these beauty pageants. And I showed up at one of the competitions, and I had these scars because I wasn't going to give up still riding motorcycles. And I had these scars down my legs. And I remember the judges asked me, they said, what are these scars that I see on your legs? And I said, well, I was riding my motorbike, and I didn't want to turn it off going down the hill, so I decided to walk it, and I fell. And anyway, I was explaining that I had this adventure. Well, that was not cool. That was not the thing. And so I did have, I guess, an adventurous type. I wouldn't call it rebellious, but I wasn't into that lifestyle at all. But these things just kept coming to me. I would never was pursuing that lifestyle or anything. But when I was in the limo on the way to the airport,
Oklahoma, 6 a.m.
When I was in the limo, this all came up, and the grooming process started. Of you look like a model. Do you model? And it just went on from there. And I didn't think about it as of anything of such. And I had a lot of encouragement from friends and family at the time to to pursue everything because they thought I had a lot of potential. And then I was asked, that's how I met Bill Cosby. And I was asked to be on, he asked me to go and become on the Cosby Show. And I thought it was just BS. So I said, okay, well, I'm free the next weekend or so, just joking around. And on that trip, I came home and my voicemail was full of messages from both the personal assistant and Cosby to come to New York. And they just kept pushing me. No, you need to come, and you need to come at this time. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what type of person he really was. So that's a little bit in a nutshell of my adventurous attitude and just pursue. I mean, you always think, why not? I survived brain cancer. I survived this. I survived that. Just go with it. Life's short. And that's the attitude I always had, was just try to do everything you can and be the best person that you can be. So
now you're in New York and you're still doing the flight attendant. So you're kind of going, this is just a short moment. Correct. For the Cosby. Yeah. So, if you're comfortable sharing what happened, Stacey, I think everyone's on the edge of their seat because no one could believe it. I mean, everyone grows up, well, not everyone, but you and I did growing up hearing about this show, and it was revolutionary in so many ways. And I think, this goes exactly to the point about what I know you're headed toward is the, corruption and the power, abuse of power. So I can't wait till we get there. So what, are you on the set with him for a whole week, or how much contact were you having?
He had asked me to come out on the Cosby Show at a certain date, and it was, I remember the dates, the time, and it was 1986, and I think it was March, and I was, they came to the airport. He came to the airport to pick me up.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was nothing fancy. There was no limo or anything. It was just a normal car. He was with Cam Cooper, and they drove me to New York. I didn't know New York. I had been there probably briefly on a layover. I was more of, for big cities, I preferred Chicago, or so I thought. And I went with them because, it's Bill Cosby. It's with his assistant. We weren't alone, and I'm going to the studio. And I just had a plan B. I had a backup plan, always had a backup plan. And back then, since we are of the same era, we didn't have the cell phones, and we didn't have, I didn't know about a lot of the stuff that we have now. And I remember we would pin, our money to our bra just in case, inside.
Right. Yeah. Your runaway money, your bus money.
Oh.
Yeah. And people could be like, "You're what?" But we didn't have a Venmo or.
But you did that, right?
I totally did it.
Oh, all right.
Your mom does not send you out without like $5 right here. And it was $5. It wasn't even like $100 bill. It was just minimal cash, as if that would help.
Yeah. So I thought, I had trust issues back then, even already, due to things that I had been through. And I had all the flights listed to fly back from New York to Chicago. All the flights. And there was a flight every 30 minutes from LaGuardia to O'Hare. So I thought, okay, if this doesn't work out, or I just had to go with it. So I was there, and I was driven directly to the studio, and And then he said that he wanted me to sit in the stands, and I sat in the stands, and there was no one else there. There was no audience. There was just the actors.
Oh, wow.
There was just the actors, the producers, the host set, and I remember I was sitting right next to Malcolm Jamal Warner, I think that was his name.
Oh, right.
Theo,
Yep.
yeah.
Mhm.
Now, see, I
Yep.
didn't know really the Cosby Show either. I didn't, but I knew of Lisa Bonet, which I just adored, and I hadn't watched episodes of the Cosby Show, but I knew of the Cosby Show, and I knew that of the standings, and I knew that every time I walked down the aisle in the supermarket, there was a standing ad, for pudding, Jello, whatever. So
Right.
I was sitting in the studios, and the director calls me down, and just right before then Theo asked me. He says, "Are you an actress?" And I said, "No." He says, "Come on, yes you are." And, "No, I'm not." He says, "Then you must be a model." Well, no red flags came up then or anything. And then, and I said, "Yes, I do some modeling." And I said, I was asked to be on the show. I'm just here to see. And then it was very shortly after that the director called me down on the stage. And I was in the stage, and I was asked to be a student nurse in one of the program, and it was called An Early Spring. And I only know it was called An Early Spring because afterwards Cosby told me that it was called An Early Spring and to watch the show. But anyhow, I was on the set with Sonia Braga, and I had to hold her hand I was like a student nurse, and I was holding her hand while she was in labor. And I did that scene, and then afterwards I came back to the set, and they said, "Come on, it's over. We'll come back to the studio tomorrow, but tonight we're going out to dinner, and you're going to meet some people in the industry," because he wanted to mentor me and get me into acting and modeling. And that's what he had told me on the airplane when I met him in first class when he was my passenger. And so, I just took it all with a grain of salt. But he says, "I got to go back to the office afterwards, and we got to stop there before we go to dinner." And I'm okay. And I'm sitting in the back seat, and Cam's driving, and we stop at his house, or it looked like a house. It was a brownstone, and he called it the office. And I thought, okay, I get to meet his wife now. Well, there was no one there. And I just remember that a few details of the place, and the flowers, and the cappuccino machine, because I didn't know what it was, and it was a beautiful brass ornament. I just remember all the little details, and sitting there talking to Cam, and he was on the telephone talking, and then he gets really angry, and his demeanor changed completely. And he called me into his office, and he said, "I want you to come into the office and stand here." And he said, "Here, take this." And it was money. And I thought, "No, what is this for?" And he said, "Don't be silly. It's for your hotel." So he said, "You're going to go to dinner. I'm not going to join now." And at the dinner, there were producers of the show. And he said I was going to meet another model that he was mentoring. And there was a woman there, and Cam took me to this dinner place in New York, and in hindsight, which everything is in hindsight, she was not really there. I remember her features, but she had no conversation. She acted terrified. And Cam was talking to me, and the other people were talking a bit, but not. It was just a really eerie situation. And then I went to the hotel. Nothing happened, so I thought, "Phew," Cosby wasn't there, and they put me up in a hotel, and I thought, okay, he is a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
And the next morning they picked me up, took me back to the studio, and briefly, and he signed an album cover for me, and he asked for my headshots, and I said, let me sign them for you. And I have a bit of a dry, sarcastic humor, and because he signed the album, I thought, okay, let me sign the headshots, and gave them to him. And there were 3, and he took me to the airport. We said goodbye, and then something very strange happened, which people don't ever want to report or talk about. But I said, if you ever need, jokingly, I said, if you ever need a white girl on the show, give me a call, because I noticed that most all the people were black. And as I said, I didn't watch the show often. I didn't see very many, but the people who were behind the scene, the producers and all of that, they weren't of the Huxtable family, which I never understood why it was called the Cosby Show instead of the Huxtable family. And I didn't even know at the time what his career was that he had as a gynecologist in the basement. I didn't find that out until later. Actually, until We Need to Talk About Cosby came out. And so all these things come into place, and everything is in hindsight. But that was when all the grooming started, the enabling. We were many in on it. And then he called me in Chicago. And I can remember this vividly because right after I was there on the show, and it was a couple of days after, I was walking across the street and a taxi cab hit me. And yeah, so I was out of commission for a while and had a concussion and damaged my pelvic ligaments and everything. And Cam called me and said, he's coming to Chicago and wants to meet with you. And I said, I'm sorry, but I was in an accident and I was ran over by a taxi, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm out on sick leave. And he's like, well, he's not going to be happy about that. And I said, sorry, but I don't feel like, and then he calls me and is persistent. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going. I'm out on sick leave and I was damaged. He didn't care anything about what happened to me, how my health was or anything. He just says, well, you got to eat. And so my boyfriend at the time, he encouraged me. He's like, Stacey, go. You should go. This is an opportunity for you. And at this time, the Cosby Show that I thought I was to be on the episode had not been out, I don't think. And I decided that I would go just to see. And then I was asked to go to Ditka's, and it was a place public, but there were people there who were waiting for me, who knew my name. There was no one around. I had to sit at the bar, and we were supposed to have dinner together and to continue talking about what never was talked about in New York. And so I was waiting and waiting, and then the bartender tells me, Stacey, there's a call that was for you. And I'm like, so then why didn't you give me the call? And he says, no, it's a message from Cosby that that he's been delayed, and you need to just sit here and have another drink. I said, I don't want to drink. I want to eat. I need to eat. And
Right.
and he says, a car will come around for you to take you to dinner. And I thought, this is really strange. I'm in a restaurant. This is where we were supposed to meet. So then this whole game started to play out. And a car took me to another restaurant in Chicago. And there were, again, like in New York, a whole group of people. I call them puppets. And sitting around. He was at the end of the table, and I remember all the details of everything. I know what I wore. I know how my hair was crimped up. I remember the restaurant. I remember the people. I remember the people come recognizing and asking him for autographs, and how his demeanor changed. He was very rude to the people. And then all of a sudden, and I said, I have to go to the bathroom. And I got up, and he says, no, wait. He said, I want, don't be rude. You need to go down and talk to the people at the end of the table. And very controlling. And so I got up. I had nothing in common with these people. They weren't interested in me at all. It's like as if they were just paid to be there. So it seemed that way. I don't know. But I went down and talked to the person, came back, and then I said, I've got to go to the bathroom. And I wasn't feeling well. And then I went in the bathroom, and I came out, not knowing how long I was in there. I think that I wanted to call my boyfriend on a payphone. Then they had payphones there kind of at the entrance by the restroom. And I think I was calling to say that it was longer than it had been. We didn't have cell phones or anything. And I was in the bathroom, don't know how long. It came out, and the maitre d' is waiting for me. And he says, Stacey, your limo's outside waiting for you. And I said, I haven't finished dinner. And I said, there's people that we haven't said goodbye. We haven't had dessert. I haven't had coffee. And I never was one. I didn't drink too much. I never could drink. It just made me sick. And I never did drugs. And also with the airlines, they tested us frequently. And that was never of my background or anything. And especially with the father that I had. But I just didn't believe what was happening. So I had to go and look for myself. And I went back to the table where we were having dinner. And there was no one there, Katie. No one. And my stuff was there. And then the maitre d' puts me into a limo. And I said, where is everybody? He says, they've already gone. And it didn't make sense to me. And I said, I don't understand. And he pushes me into the limo, and I said, I want to go home. And he says, the driver knows where to take you. And he's closed the door. The doors are locked. I can't get out. I can't talk to the limo. And I'm telling him, take me to my address at my home. And he wouldn't talk to me, and he drives me. Apparently, I had blacked out in the bathroom. I don't know how long. And apparently, I was in and out in the limo, and then I was driven to the hotel and in Chicago. And I walk up and I said, I'm looking for the Cosby party. And they said, there's no one here by that name. And I knew from the airlines that people used different names when they checked in to, for their privacy. And I said, look, I don't know why I'm here, but I was having dinner, and all of a sudden I'm thrown into a limo. I was kidnapped, and I don't know why I'm here at this hotel. Apparently the dinner party is continuing on, and I was trying to rationalize this behavior. And I thought, if the dinner was cut short and he was rude to these ladies because they were asking for his autograph, maybe we just were going to continue on somewhere else. Because I didn't want to think anything bad or wrong, and I had no reason to, as I thought then, to think differently. But I thought, there's something not right, and I wasn't feeling well. And the hotel staff looked, and they saw in my hand there was I looked, and there was an imprint, and there was a key and I had it clutched tightly in my hand. Now I don't know if the maitre d' put it in there, or I had just grabbed it with my stuff when I was thrown into the limo. And they saw it, and they said, go up the stairs, up down the hall, take the elevator, and on your left side. So I thought, okay, this is where everyone's at. And I walk into a room, lights blinking, and I think it's a message from me, and I'm thinking this game of charades I'm tired of. I'm just going to go home. And I pick up the telephone, and they say, Mrs. Cosby, you're, and I say, no, I'm not Mrs. Cosby. And they said, your meeting tomorrow has been canceled at this university. And I said, no, I'm not Mrs. Cosby. And at that time, he walked into the room, and he was yelling at me. And he was telling me that I shouldn't be on the phone. He told me not to talk to anyone, which he did tell me on the telephone before we had the meeting. He said, don't talk to the press. Don't talk to anyone. I'm thinking, why would I talk to the press? And I have no connections with the press. And anyway, in hindsight, it was all part of the grooming package. And then I tried to get away, and the door was locked. So I was held hostage. I used my my tactics that I had learned for hijacking to the airlines, and tried all of that to get away. And he told me to sit down, and there was some champagne there and fruit, everything, and he had a present for me that I was being very rude. And so I realized that I needed to, with his behavior, I needed to do this and then be graceful and get out the best way that I could. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And I went to the bathroom, and I was very sick. And I thought, okay. I looked at myself. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to open the door. He wanted me to try on this gift that he had given me. And it was a sweatshirt signed by Larry Bird. And I brought it up and said, it's just too big. So I tried to get away. I said no. I said I'm not interested. I gave all these excuses. The door was locked. He grabbed me, forced me, and then he raped me as I was going unconscious. And I woke up hours later, and to the sound of him snoring, and I tried to get out as quietly as I could, as fast, and leave. And I went down to the hotel lobby and told him to call the police.
Oh my God, Stacey, that's terrifying. It's so terrifying.
But what's worse is they didn't call the police. I mean, it's not worse, but they didn't call the police.
No, it's all worse. It's all worse. It's all bad. What you think he told them? That's just you're thinking this is what he does on a regular basis. Yeah,
we know that now, but I didn't know it at the time. I don't even know how I went down to the lobby, what I was wearing.
Yeah.
I think I was wearing that sweatshirt. I don't know, but I told them 3 times to call the police. They didn't, and I said, then I'll do it myself. And I went out. It was probably 4 or 5 in the morning. So it was many hours that I don't know what all he did to me after I was unconscious. And then I flagged down a cab, and then the cab says, "Which precinct, ma'am? Which precinct?" Because I said, "Take me to the police." And he's like, "What's it for?" And I didn't want to tell him what it was for. I had too much time. And I remember I was thinking, the press had eaten alive back then a woman who had a complaint against Mike Tyson. And I thought, what are they going to do to me? No one's going to believe me because of who he is. I don't have the money to fight it. And I had all this time to think about, and I just said, just take me home. And I went home. And my boyfriend was there waiting for me because he knew I'd gone to the dinner. And he said, I don't remember if he was calling the police or said he called the police. But the problem is I never had an opportunity to have my day in court to tell my full story, or to tell everything that happened, and even all the other details, or to have it investigated. And they said because of the statute of limitations. And so that's when I got involved and started working on changing the laws and seeing if I could change the laws state by state, and then defining consent. Because after that happened, I was terrified. I was afraid. He knew where I lived. I had to move, and I kept moving, but it wasn't far enough. So I moved to Hawaii. That wasn't far enough. And then I moved from Hawaii I decided to up and go to Spain. And I thought, there, no one knows him. He's not popular. And, I can I didn't speak the language. I didn't know anyone. So, yeah, I guess I have a bit of a adventure side of me. But I had to do that for my own survival. And I knew that if I told my father, that he would have taken the law into his own hands. So that's what I did. And I ended up in Spain. I've been living there since 1989. And now I'm back in the state, because I have my mother that I'm here for and try to help. But I started living in Spain.
Let me ask you, so this happened in 86?
Yes.
86. I'm just thinking for our listeners' sake. So Stacey's having this experience in 86. In my case, at college with a date was in 1990. So just 4 years before Stacey. And that Mike Tyson case was before too. You just started hearing a little bit in the 80s about the issue, and then more into the 90s. So I think the timeline is so interesting, and to think about like your mentality and wherewithal to figure out, as I'm like, using your tactics, learn from the airlines to get away from Cosby. Like, that's so cool. That's like you're a superstar out of a movie in this horrible situation, except it's real life and you're not an actor.
But it didn't work. It didn't work, Katie.
I know. But I'm picturing you like thinking through all these, like, what can I do now? And how can I, and you were thinking so fast on your feet, even though your head was full of a mess of drugs, probably whatever he gave you. And my gosh, your wherewithal and ability to try. It's it's incredible.
I have to give my father a little bit of credit on that, because he was after he was in the military and all, he was a first responder. And so he was, captain of the fire department. And I heard all the stories and things, but I never heard about anyone ever calling for rape.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody did. When we were growing up, Stacey, nobody talked about it.
No. And that moment in that cab, and it's all ironic because I hesitated getting in that cab because only a few weeks before I was hit by the cab, and it was the same company. It was the same company that had hit me and that I was in a lawsuit with because, and I was thinking, there's this company, but it was like, just get in and go to the police at that moment. But I just remember thinking, we only had yellow pages back then.
I know. People forgot. People won't remember. But, even Stacey, when you're telling the story, it's so interesting to hear you talk through your story, because you're as detailed. Like when I tell my story on the stage, I'm just like you. I'm very precise and detailed, and like down to the cappuccino machine. And like, I love how detailed and brilliant you are. And I also am thinking like you did it a lot just as we're talking. It's like you're still all these years later, like I am, having to go through and justify each of your actions to prove you were intelligent, to prove like why you chose these things. Instead, still and I love also though you were great at pointing out the enablers, and like how you I liked how you described that his Kim wasn't really there. And, it's almost like I can picture it in my head the way you described it as there's the you and there's the him, and you described his tone of voice. Like, you're a great storyteller about your own life, Stacey. It's so beautifully, because you can almost see it like a set, like fading into the background. There's all these little pieces that move around the board to make this one thing happen, and be so well orchestrated and so conniving. And but I guess, I feel like you were built for it, and where you are now, you're strong, stalwart, like clearly determined, and I love it. I mean, I hope our listeners will hear all of the things, and that's why I just wanted to remind. I love you bringing up the yellow pages. Like, I want our listeners, no matter how old you are, hearing this episode, that you give some big context to the issue and the history of it, and what we did or didn't know, and yet still what has remained the same.
Yeah.
There's so much that it's like crazy. It's 40 years later, we're still dealing with all this stuff. But maybe we could, just in the last part of our conversation, let's talk about some of the laws and the work you're doing right now. And, what can our listeners who want to get involved with helping to get those statute of limitations overturned, what would you, bring whoever's hearing us? They might join your cause. So I'm certainly trying, but tell anyone else who's listening more about what you're doing and how they can help.
Well, there's several things that I'm doing. One that I think is very important, and it's something that I had to get involved with, and it's all because of what had happened through me, the personal assistant, and then all the enablers, and with the hotel. Well, lo and behold, my daughter decided to get her degree in hotel management. And I was like, haven't you learned enough from me? And that wasn't the life for her. She got her degree. It wasn't what she wanted or expected, and it's a hard business. And then she decided to do this course that is for personal assistance of the 1%. So she was, and it was the only course globally that she was doing, and it was the first course that existed. And I said to her, do they have a course to teach assistants about enabling, whether they're willingly or unwillingly, unknowingly enabling? Because when you work for someone who, the richest people in the world, as their personal or an executive assistant, you can't call HR, but HR is always on the company side. They're protecting the company. And I thought, I've got to reach out to this institute and tell them that they need to have a course on educating and ethics about all this enabling and how to handle and what to do. And so I did that, and I invited attorneys to join me, and we talked about all of this and consent and to be aware. And I said, I don't really like calling it, and I tried to use another term. I don't like using sexual assault. Rape is one thing, but I prefer to call it abuse of power. And the reason I prefer to call it abuse of power is because it's what it is, whether it's a teacher to a student or a minister to his, you can tell I don't go to church that much. I don't, the people in the audience. But it's abuse of power because always they have some form of power over the other person. And the reason being is because this crime affects you lifelong. It has effects that no one addresses or likes to talk about because it's uncomfortable. And even intimacy, even when you've go into a relationship, whatever, it affects your intimacy. And I don't like to call it sexual assault because sex is something that's supposed to be beautiful and consensual. And so why do we call it sexual assault? Why don't we call it abuse of power? And that was what I called the course in the Institute, was abuse of power.
Nice.
But I alone can't change that terminology. But I think it's something that we all need to think about. And I think it, when I explain it, people say, yeah. But it's also because after I had to go to the courtroom for Andrea Constad's, because I was there to be a witness if the judge allowed us to speak, but he only allowed one. In the first trial, in a mistrial, and in the second trial, there were 5. And at the beginning, I was Jane Doe, and I stayed Jane Doe because I hadn't shared this with my father.
Oh, right.
And I was afraid that he would have a heart attack or something. I knew he was too old to do anything about it at that point, but his health was very bad. And so the night before I went to the sentencing, I had to tell him, I was staying with them. I flew in from Spain and was staying with them, and he didn't know anything about it. I'm like, did you hear about, this case? And I was using the correct terminology, Montgomery County versus William H. Cosby. No. Did you hear about this? No. And I'm like, well, and I had to say, Dad, I had to be quiet. I couldn't share this with anybody. And then I set him down and told him, and he was just devastated. And he says, why didn't you tell me before? And I said, because I didn't want to see you in jail. And he said, I would have saved the courts a lot of money.
Oh, see, that's where you get some of it from, Stacey. I'm sorry, but that's like, you don't like it, but I hear you. My dad was an FBI agent, like SWAT and fire. He did anything deadly and dangerous. So I think I got some of it rubbed off on me, even though it wasn't the greatest response, but we do what we do.
Correct.
Yeah, I love it. Well, it's like so fun to meet you and know how strong and cool you are. But anyway, what about the last thing is the laws?
Right.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, the statute of limitations, they have changed in a lot of states for minors. But I do believe that it should be universal across the board in each state, like in murder, because this is a murder on the soul. And it does affect you lifelong, and as we discussed earlier. And some of the states, why is it that only up to the age of 18? What if you're 18 and a day older? Then you're an adult, and then it doesn't matter. And the statute of limitations for me in my case, then I didn't realize or know anything about that, was 2 years. We know now it takes 20, 30, 40 years for people to come forward and to be able to, be at that point where they can talk about it and share their story. And because society has always shunned and not allowed us to have our voice. So I started working with a consent awareness network to define consent into the laws. That's been a big struggle. There's no definition of consent in most states. And if they have it, it's not really as we need it to be freely given, knowledgeable and informed agreement. And the statute of limitations still has not changed in a lot of states. And we have to work on that. We have to do that. And it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter of politics. It shouldn't matter of it. It has. There's nothing that should be stopping this. Everyone needs to have their day in court. And when I was in this state, I had approached abolishing the statute of limitations. I was fought against the Judiciary Committee. They said that they need to have a statute of limitations. And I said, look at how many cases are prosecuted. Hardly any cases are prosecuted at all. And they're looking for the perfect victim, which does not exist. And
Mhm.
why not let, people have their due process and their day in court and let the jury decide? But, it's a lot of it is about money. And, sometimes there's a short time limit for some people to come forward, but then they're only going towards where there's entities involved. If it's an individual who is the predator, who has done the crime, often there's not enough money.
Mhm.
And so the cases just aren't processed.
Well, I like your logic, though. I mean, it's so well thought out. I think when I was reflecting as you were talking, and I think the idea that, if you say this is murder on a soul, the only thing is it's still sexism to me, Stacey. Like the fact that rape is horrific. You live through it, right? So you're not dead. But if we just started looking at it as, a terrible, terrible crime that we should allow anyone to go after their perpetrator, it's all, to me, it's only mostly because it's women who are affected. I mean, except for young boys, right? So we
Right.
allow, it's so interesting when you think about it, because the young boys get their day in the court, even if they're now adults, because boys are most vulnerable when they're, 8 to 15, and yet girls their whole lives. So I think it's another underlying sexism, right, when you think
Correct.
about it. So we don't get very far still in 2025,
Mm.
but we can keep working on it, and hopefully we'll find some. We have a lot of attorneys who are paying better attention. We have the National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline now for survivors. So that, coupled with at Take Back the Night, we have a whole legal team of summer law students and volunteers who are helping to get some of these things passed. So after this show's over, we can maybe talk a little bit about connecting you with them too. And but anyway, I think, is there anything else? I know you said you're coming out with a website, so people will be able to learn more about you and your work, right?
Yeah, well, what I've done for myself is I've gotten involved in theater, and I do a lot of that. That helps me with healing, and of course, I'm trying to write my story as well, in detail and through my childhood and what came through. There's a lot more than I was able to share with you in this time, but I'm
No,
working. I'm working on that, and I'm working on, when I can, and just and wherever I can to talk about this story. And there's another thing that I wanted to share with you. When I was in Spain, I started volunteering at the hospital as a medical interpreter, and while I was there working, I I saw and dealt with a lot of sexual assault, as they call it, or drug facilitated assault of these young girls who go on their holidays, and they go to Spain, and they end up waking up on a beach, and their drinks had been drugged, and maybe they were robbed. They don't know what happened to them. They were unconscious. They're afraid to tell anyone because maybe they were not supposed to be even drinking, so they don't want to tell mom. And then I had dealt with a lot of women who were part of human trafficking, who came in from Africa, and they shared with their story. And that time, I said, I dealt with forensics and the police and the gynecologist at the hospital and everything, and they wouldn't talk to anyone except they shared with me all of the details. But I saw all the systems and how it it fails victims of this horrific crime. And so I have a lot to tell, and I have learned a lot throughout the years, and I speak with a lot of women. Almost every woman I speak to has a story, some men as well, and it's the Me Too started awareness, but it's not the answer. And the answer is that we just have to all work together and get the laws changed, and then make sure that we have accountability, and also hold the enablers accountable, because they are part of this crime. Because it takes a village of enablers to let a predator do what they do.
Yeah, what's so beautifully said, Stacey. I just have so enjoyed our conversation, and you've definitely brought even, another way for me to think about the problem. And I'm really delighted to hear about what you did in Spain, and I'm sure you'll go back and continue to shape shift, because we are working here in the U.S., but we are. Certainly, I know Take Back the Night, we have a lot more volunteers now coming in from other countries, Trinidad and Tobago, and then Nigeria and Kenya, and like all over India. So it's just endless, the work. I wish we could live 3 more lifetimes to get it all done. But, that's why we try as hard as we can with what we have. And you are clearly an exemplar of that. And I'm really delighted that you're writing, and I can't wait to have more people hear about your story, and be encouraged and join the cause. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for using your platform to get the word out and let people feel that they have someone they can turn to, because not everyone does.
No, I totally agree. And what's nice about the podcast is it's like that little $5 bill stuck in our bra. We can carry it around as like a little way out when we need it, just so we know we're not alone and we do have each other. So I like that metaphor.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to close with?
Pardon?
Anything else you want to share?
One thing that I do want to share that I found was one of the most difficult parts after going to the sentencing was being silenced again the whole time. And I was silenced by attorneys, and I was silenced because they were worried about defamation and all these things. But it did a lot of harm. When you're ready to get it out and just try to get accountability in some form, even if it's just for yourself and for your own healing process. Because I had a lot of chronic health issues throughout the years, and still do. But when I was silenced, I had a talk radio program in Europe, and what I had decided to do was, after the sentencing, I came out and told my story briefly, that I was gone because I came back for the sentencing. And I decided to use one day a week with survivors of different type sharing their story. And I went around the world. I didn't want to just cover, Cosby survivors. And then after that, it was like a domino effect too. Then it came out the Weinstein, then the Epstein, and then it was all this other stuff that's now starting to shed light on a problem that's been there all along, that society has turned a blind eye to. But it's important that we have these platforms so that people can get it out and heal and do the best that they can with what we can, and keep changing the laws, trying our best.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Stacey, and for your courage and your strength and ongoing commitment. It is abundantly apparent, and I hope that everyone will be super inspired today. And just as a closing for our listeners, I just love reflecting on each and every one of the people on the show and their own strength and courage, and how, I hope that you'll do the same thing. It's like, I will take one more thing and say, what else can we do? What else can we do next? And the self-care and, making sure that we do have outlets, I think, is so important. And one of those outlets might be, taking up the cause and giving someone else a voice if they're not ready to have their own yet. So continue to journey with us. And don't forget the legal hotline. As I mentioned earlier, justice is just a phone call or a formal way you can try. Our lawyers are all over the country. They're so committed, trauma-informed, and they will research anything to find out if we still have a case or whatever else we can do. So until our next episode, please continue on. You are never alone. Together we are thriving and surviving. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear Katie. These conversations are never easy, but they're always necessary, and we're so grateful you chose to share this space with us. If something in today's episode stirred something within you, please give yourself what you need. Whether that's rest, support, or just a deep breath, you're not alone. To hear more stories, resources, and survivor-centered conversations, be sure to subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We want to hear from you, so please leave us a review and share your feedback. Your thoughts help us create episodes that resonate with listeners. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.